The sound of the front door clicking shut usually signaled the start of Clara's favorite hour. The quiet transition from the grueling pace of the corporate world to the sanctuary of the home she had spent 12 years perfecting. But tonight, the air in the foyer didn't carry the scent of rain or the cold crispness of the evening. It carried the sharp metallic tang of a secret finally breaking skin. Clara Sterling stood in the center of her pristine living room, her hands trembling as she clutched a silk throw pillow she had bought to celebrate their 10th anniversary. Across from her, Julian, the man who had promised to honor and protect her through every storm, wasn't holding a briefcase or a bouquet of apology lilies. He was holding a car seat. And inside that car seat, swaddled in a blue blanket that looked like a bruise against the cream-colored carpet, was a 3-month-old infant with Julian's exact jawline and the unmistakable deep-set eyes of a woman Clara had seen in the background of Julian's work photos for over a year. "She's gone, Clara," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly steady as if he were discussing a change in the quarterly budget. "The mother, she can't do this. She walked away. And I'm his father. This is my son. Our son, if you just open your heart. I thought, after 12 years of everything we've built, you'd understand that family is what we make it." The world tilted. The 12 years of sacrifice. The 3 miscarriages Clara had endured in silence so as not to distract Julian from his climb to senior partner, the late-night dinners she kept warm, the moves across 3 states to follow his ambitions, all of it dissolved into a singular agonizing point of light. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a nanny. He was asking her to raise the living, breathing evidence of his betrayal. Hello to all of you beautiful souls joining us today. I am so grateful to have you here in our corner of the world. Whether you are watching from the bustling streets of London, the quiet suburbs of Ohio, or the vibrant heart of Lagos, please let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. How are you truly doing today? If you've ever felt like your world was crashing down, only to find your strength in the wreckage, this story is for you. Before we dive deeper into Clara's journey of fire and rebirth, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and join our family. Your support means everything to us, and it helps us keep sharing these stories of resilience and hope. Clara looked at the child, then back at Julian. For the first time in over a decade, she didn't see her husband. She saw a stranger who had mistaken her grace for weakness. Julian moved toward her, his face twisting into that practiced, manipulative pout that had always made her relent in the past. "Clara, think of the scandal if people find out. Think of my career. Think of us. You've always been the strong one. You've always been the heart of this house. We can raise him together and no one ever has to know the truth." He reached out to touch her shoulder, his fingers grazing the fabric of her blouse. Clara felt a jolt of pure, icy electricity. It wasn't the heat of anger, but the cold, hard clarity of a woman who had finally reached the end of her rope. She realized in that heartbeat that her marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a long-term heist, and Julian had been stealing her life one sacrifice at a time. "You want me to be the mother to your affair, baby?" Clara's voice was a whisper, but it cut through Julian's confidence like a blade. "I want you to be my wife," he corrected, his eyes narrowing. "Wives stand by their husbands, Clara. That's the deal." "The deal is dead, Julian," she said, stepping back so abruptly he stumbled. "And so is the woman who would have said yes to this." She looked at the child again. Innocent, yet a weapon Julian was trying to use to shackle her. A terrifying question hung in the air, vibrating through the silent house. How far will a woman go to reclaim the soul she lost in the shadow of a man? And when the world expects you to be a martyr, do you have the courage to be a traitor to your vows to save your life? The silence that followed Clara's declaration was heavy, thick with the scent of Julian's expensive cologne and the faint, milky aroma of the infant. As Clara looked at Julian, she didn't just see the man who had betrayed her. She saw the architect of a life she had carefully, painfully curated. Clara Fawcett, a name she had taken from him with such pride 12 years ago, had been a woman of boundless empathy. Raised in a household where loyalty was the highest currency, Clara had learned early on that love was synonymous with service. Her father had been a hardworking man who expected dinner on the table at 6. And her mother had been the silent engine that kept the family running, regardless of her own exhaustion. Clara had stepped into that same role with Julian Snyder, believing that her support was the fuel for his success. In the early years when they were living in a cramped apartment above a noisy deli, Clara had worked 2 jobs so Julian could finish his law degree. She had been his editor, his sounding board, and his greatest cheerleader. Her deepest desire wasn't for wealth or status, though they eventually acquired both. It was to be the other half of a greatness she believed they shared. Her deepest fear, one she barely whispered to herself during the long nights he worked late, was that without Julian she was an unfinished sentence. She had tied her identity so tightly to the knot of their marriage that she didn't know where she ended and he began. Julian Snyder, however, was a man built on the pillars of optics and acquisition. A high-powered litigator with a smile that could disarm a judge and a heart that functioned like a calculator, Julian viewed Clara not as a partner, but as a prestigious asset. She was the perfect wife who hosted the perfect dinners, wore the perfect clothes, and maintained the perfect home. A sanctuary he could retreat to after a day of predatory negotiations. He loved Clara in his own way, but it was the love one has for a reliable car or a well-managed investment. He never expected her to have a breaking point because he had spent 12 years systematically convincing her that her value was tied to her tolerance. Into this delicate ecosystem stepped Julian's younger sister, Elena Snyder. Elena was the antithesis of the Snyder family's cold ambition. A freelance artist who lived in a loft across town, Elena had always been Clara's closest confidant. While Julian looked at Clara and saw a wife, Elena looked at Clara and saw a caged bird. "You're fading, Clara," Elena had warned her just a month ago over coffee. "You're becoming the wallpaper in your own life. When was the last time you painted? When was the last time you did something that didn't have Julian's name on the invitation?" Clara had laughed it off then, citing the busy season and Julian's upcoming promotion. But now, standing in the foyer, Elena's words rang like a funeral bell. As Julian adjusted the car seat, his movements were frantic yet entitled. "Think about the optics, Clara. I'm up for the partnership. If the board finds out I have a child out of wedlock with a former paralegal, they'll see it as a lack of judgment. But if we frame this as an adoption, a noble choice we made together because of our struggles to conceive, I'm a hero. We're a power couple." The sheer coldness of his logic made Clara's stomach churn. He was weaponizing her infertility, the 3 losses that had nearly broken her spirit, to cover his tracks. He was asking her to use her deepest trauma as a prop for his career. "The paralegal," Clara whispered, the pieces clicking into place. "Vanessa? The one you said was too emotional for the firm? The one you helped find a new job 3 towns over?" Julian didn't blink. "She was a mistake, Clara. A moment of weakness when you were unavailable. But the boy is a Snyder. He belongs here." Clara looked at her reflection in the gilded mirror in the hallway. She saw a woman in a designer suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, her skin pale. But behind the eyes, there was a flicker of something she hadn't seen in a decade. It was the girl she used to be, the one who climbed trees, who spoke her mind, who didn't care about optics. Before we continue into the heart of this confrontation, I want to take a quick second to check in with you all. This story is hitting some heavy themes about self-worth and betrayal. Have you ever had a light bulb moment where you realized someone was using your kindness against you? Drop a yes in the comments if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when it was the hardest thing to do. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us tell more stories of strength and empowerment just like this one. As Clara stood there, she realized that Julian's secret wasn't just the baby. The secret was that he didn't actually know her at all. He knew the Clara he had molded, but he didn't know the fire that was currently smoldering in her gut. He thought he could give her a child, the thing she had wanted most, and she would be so grateful she'd overlook the sin that brought him there. "You think I'm so desperate to be a mother that I'll accept a child born of your betrayal?" Clara asked, her voice gaining a terrifying edge of iron. "I think you're a woman of your word," Julian snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. "You promised for better or for worse. Well, this is the worse, Clara. Deal with it." He walked past her, intending to set the car seat on the dining table, acting as if the matter was settled. But Clara didn't move toward the baby. She moved toward the closet. She pulled out a suitcase, the expensive leather one they had bought for their honeymoon in Italy, and threw it onto the sofa. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, his voice rising in pitch. "I'm dealing with it," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "But not the way you think." The hidden depth of Clara's resolve was finally surfacing. She wasn't just hurt, she was waking up. And as she began to pack, she realized the greatest secret of all. The marriage hadn't been unshakable. It had been a prison, and Julian had just handed her the keys. The silence that followed Clara's declaration was heavy, thick with the scent of Julian's expensive cologne and the faint, milky aroma of the infant. As Clara looked at Julian, she didn't just see the man who had betrayed her. She saw the architect of a life she had carefully, painfully curated. Clara Fawcett, a name she had taken from him with such pride 12 years ago, had been a woman of boundless empathy. Raised in a household where loyalty was the highest currency, Clara had learned early on that love was synonymous with service. Her father had been a hard-working man who expected dinner on the table at 6, and her mother had been the silent engine that kept the family running, regardless of her own exhaustion. Clara had stepped into that same role with Julian Snyder, believing that her support was the fuel for his success. In the early years when they were living in a cramped apartment above a noisy deli, Clara had worked 2 jobs so Julian could finish his law degree. She had been his editor, his sounding board, and his greatest cheerleader. Her deepest desire wasn't for wealth or status, though they eventually acquired both. It was to be the other half of a greatness she believed they shared. Her deepest fear, one she barely whispered to herself during the long nights he worked late, was that without Julian she was an unfinished sentence. She had tied her identity so tightly to the knot of their marriage that she didn't know where she ended and he began. Julian Snyder, however, was a man built on the pillars of optics and acquisition. A high-powered litigator with a smile that could disarm a judge and a heart that functioned like a calculator, Julian viewed Clara not as a partner, but as a prestigious asset. She was the perfect wife who hosted the perfect dinners, wore the perfect clothes, and maintained the perfect home. A sanctuary he could retreat to after a day of predatory negotiations. He loved Clara in his own way, but it was the love one has for a reliable car or a well-managed investment. He never expected her to have a breaking point because he had spent 12 years systematically convincing her that her value was tied to her tolerance. Into this delicate ecosystem stepped Julian's younger sister, Elena Snyder. Elena was the antithesis of the Snyder family's cold ambition. A freelance artist who lived in a loft across town, Elena had always been Clara's closest confidant. While Julian looked at Clara and saw a wife, Elena looked at Clara and saw a caged bird. "You're fading, Clara," Elena had warned her just a month ago over coffee. "You're becoming the wallpaper in your own life. When was the last time you painted? When was the last time you did something that didn't have Julian's name on the invitation?" Clara had laughed it off then, citing the busy season and Julian's upcoming promotion. But now, standing in the foyer, Elena's words rang like a funeral bell. As Julian adjusted the car seat, his movements were frantic yet entitled. "Think about the optics, Clara. I'm up for the partnership. If the board finds out I have a child out of wedlock with a former paralegal, they'll see it as a lack of judgment. But if we frame this as an adoption, a noble choice we made together because of our struggles to conceive, I'm a hero. We're a power couple." The sheer coldness of his logic made Clara's stomach churn. He was weaponizing her infertility, the 3 losses that had nearly broken her spirit, to cover his tracks. He was asking her to use her deepest trauma as a prop for his career. "The paralegal," Clara whispered, the pieces clicking into place. "Vanessa? The one you said was too emotional for the firm? The one you helped find a new job 3 towns over?" Julian didn't blink. "She was a mistake, Clara. A moment of weakness when you were unavailable. But the boy is a Snyder. He belongs here." Clara looked at her reflection in the gilded mirror in the hallway. She saw a woman in a designer suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, her skin pale. But behind the eyes, there was a flicker of something she hadn't seen in a decade. It was the girl she used to be, the one who climbed trees, who spoke her mind, who didn't care about optics. Before we continue into the heart of this confrontation, I want to take a quick second to check in with you all. This story is hitting some heavy themes about self-worth and betrayal. Have you ever had a light bulb moment where you realized someone was using your kindness against you? Drop a yes in the comments if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when it was the hardest thing to do. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us tell more stories of strength and empowerment just like this one. As Clara stood there, she realized that Julian's secret wasn't just the baby. The secret was that he didn't actually know her at all. He knew the Clara he had molded, but he didn't know the fire that was currently smoldering in her gut. He thought he could give her a child, the thing she had wanted most, and she would be so grateful she'd overlook the sin that brought him there. "You think I'm so desperate to be a mother that I'll accept a child born of your betrayal?" Clara asked, her voice gaining a terrifying edge of iron. "I think you're a woman of your word," Julian snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. "You promised for better or for worse. Well, this is the worse, Clara. Deal with it." He walked past her, intending to set the car seat on the dining table, acting as if the matter was settled. But Clara didn't move toward the baby. She moved toward the closet. She pulled out a suitcase, the expensive leather one they had bought for their honeymoon in Italy, and threw it onto the sofa. "What are you doing?" Julian asked, his voice rising in pitch. "I'm dealing with it," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "But not the way you think." The hidden depth of Clara's resolve was finally surfacing. She wasn't just hurt, she was waking up. And as she began to pack, she realized the greatest secret of all. The marriage hadn't been unshakable. It had been a prison, and Julian had just handed her the keys. The sound of the suitcase zipper rasping through the air was the loudest thing in the room. Julian stood frozen, the infant beginning to whimper in the car seat. A thin, reedy sound that grated against the high-tension atmosphere. Julian's face transitioned from smug entitlement to a mask of pure, bewildered rage. "You're being hysterical, Clara," he spat, using the word like a leash. "Where are you going to go? Your parents are in Florida, and you haven't held a real paycheck in years. You've lived off my success for over a decade. Sit down, breathe, and let's discuss the logistics of the adoption announcement." Clara didn't stop. She moved with a mechanical, haunting precision, grabbing her passport and the jewelry her grandmother had left her. Things that belonged to her, not the Snyder brand. "The logistics are simple, Julian. You keep the house. You keep the lies. Keep the baby. I keep my soul." She turned to leave, but the front door swung open before she could reach it. Standing there, drenched from the sudden downpour outside, was a man Clara hadn't seen in years. It was Elias Thorne. Elias had been Julian's primary rival in the legal circuit, a man Julian had spent years disparaging as unprincipled and unstable. But Clara remembered Elias differently. He had been the only one to look her in the eye at firm galas, the only one who didn't talk over her. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand, his eyes darting from Clara's suitcase to the baby on the dining table. "I'm sorry to intrude," Elias said, his voice deep and laced with a strange mixture of pity and urgency. But the firm's investigators found out Vanessa was planning to file a paternity suit against the firm itself, not just Julian. "They were going to serve the papers at your anniversary gala tomorrow night. I couldn't let you be blindsided like that, Clara. Not in front of 500 people." Julian's face went ashen. The heroic adoption narrative he was trying to sell was a desperate attempt to get ahead of a public execution of his reputation. He wasn't bringing the baby home out of a sense of duty. He was using Clara as a human shield against a lawsuit. "Get out, Elias," Julian roared, stepping forward. "This is a private family matter." "It stopped being private when you used firm funds to pay for Vanessa's apartment for the last 14 months, Elias countered, tossing the envelope onto the table. "That's embezzlement, Julian. The board is meeting at dawn." The revelation hit Clara like a physical blow. It wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic betrayal of everything they had built, legally, financially, and emotionally. Julian hadn't just broken their vows. He had gambled their entire future on the hope that he could keep Clara quiet and compliant. The baby's cry escalated into a full-blown wail. The sound was piercing, a raw demand for care that Clara knew with a sickening certainty Julian was incapable of providing. Julian looked at the infant with a flash of genuine loathing. In that moment, the power couple facade shattered completely. "Is it true?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. "The money? The apartment? You took from our joint savings to fund your double life." Julian didn't answer. His silence was the loudest confession of her life. "Before we see how Clara handles this double betrayal, I have to ask, have you ever had a moment where the person you trusted most turned out to be someone you never truly knew?" The mask falling off is a terrifying experience. Tell us your story in the comments. We're a community that listens. And if you're rooting for Clara to walk out that door and never look back, make sure you've subscribed. We're just getting started. Claire looked at Elias. Why are you here, Elias? Why tell me now? Because 12 years ago, I watched you marry a man who didn't deserve you, Elias said, his gaze unwavering. And I didn't say anything because I thought you were happy. But no one deserves to be a prop in a criminal's play. Julian lunged for the envelope, but Clara was faster. She snatched it up, her eyes scanning the bank statements and the photos of Julian and Vanessa at a mountain resort Clara had always wanted to visit. The betrayal was meticulous. It was practiced. You thought I would raise this baby, Clara said, turning back to Julian. Her eyes were no longer filled with tears. They were filled with a cold, terrifying light. You thought I would be the good wife, one last time to save your skin. You have nowhere else to go, Clara. Julian screamed, the baby's cries echoing his desperation. You're nothing without the Snyder name. Clara gripped the handle of her suitcase. The fear that had kept her paralyzed for years, the fear of being nothing, suddenly vanished. If being something meant being Julian's accomplice, she would gladly embrace the void. Watch me, she said. She walked past Julian, past the baby who was a victim of a father's ego, and out into the rain. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have a destination. But as she stepped into the night, the weight of 12 years of lies began to lift, replaced by the heavy, beautiful burden of freedom. The inciting incident wasn't just the baby's arrival. It was the moment Clara realized that the only person who could save her was the one she had ignored for a decade, herself. The rain was a cold, unrelenting curtain that blurred the streetlights into jagged halos. Clara sat in the back of a taxi, her leather suitcase damp against her knees. She had nowhere to go, yet for the first time in 12 years she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Her phone buzzed incessantly in her coat pocket. Julian, calling and texting a frantic mix of apologies, threats and reminders of her duties. She didn't block him. She watched the screen light up and fade, a dying pulse of a life she was leaving behind. She checked into a small, nondescript hotel on the edge of the city, a place far removed from the marble-floored high-rises Julian frequented. As she sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by a crushing hollow ache. The silence was deafening. For 12 years her life had been a symphony of Julian's needs. Now there was only the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of traffic. The next morning the rising tension shifted from emotional to practical. Clara woke up to find her credit cards declined. Julian had moved with the ruthless efficiency of a trial lawyer, freezing their joint accounts and cutting off her access to the life he claimed he provided. He was trying to starve her back into submission. Is this how you play? Clara whispered to the empty room, a grim smile touching her lips. She reached out to the one person who wouldn't judge her, Elena Snyder. They met at a small park, far from the prying eyes of the legal community. Elena looked devastated, having already heard a warped version of the story from her brother. He's telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown, Clara, Elena said, gripping Clara's hand. He's saying you couldn't handle the generous offer to adopt a child in need and that you've abandoned your family. He's already painting you as the villain to protect his partnership. Let him paint, Clara replied, her voice steady. He's using charcoal on a sinking ship. But the tension escalated when Elena revealed the true depth of Julian's desperation. He wasn't just worried about his reputation. He was worried about the manila envelope Elias Thorne had delivered. Those documents contained proof of financial crimes that could land Julian in prison. He wants those papers back, Clara. He thinks you took them, Elena warned. He's been calling the police, claiming you stole sensitive legal documents from his home office. Clara felt a flicker of fear. Julian was a master of the legal system. He knew how to twist the law until it became a noose. She wasn't just a runaway wife anymore. In Julian's narrative, she was a thief. Just as the walls seemed to be closing in, Clara's phone rang. It wasn't Julian. It was Elias Thorne. I heard about the accounts, Elias said without preamble. And I heard about the police report. Julian is playing a dangerous game, but he's forgotten one thing. He's not the only one who knows how to litigate. Elias offered her a proposition. He had a small guest house on his property, private, secure, and outside of Julian's immediate reach. More importantly, he had a team of forensic accountants who could turn the papers Clara held into a shield. Before we see if Clara chooses to trust her husband's greatest rival, I want to take a moment to speak to you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between the safe path of staying in a toxic situation and the dangerous path of freedom? It takes an incredible amount of guts to step into the unknown. If you're cheering for Clara to take that leap, leave a "Go Clara" in the comments. And please, if you haven't subscribed, join us now. We're documenting a woman's journey from being a shadow to becoming the sun. Clara moved into the guest house, but the sanctuary felt like a gilded cage of its own. She spent her days poring over the documents, her corporate background finally serving a purpose that wasn't Julian's promotion. She discovered that Julian hadn't just used their savings for an apartment. He had been funneling money into an offshore account in the name of the baby's mother, Vanessa. The romantic tension between Clara and Elias began to simmer in the quiet moments between legal strategy sessions. One evening, as they sat over a spread of takeout and legal briefs, Elias reached across the table to steady Clara's hand as she pointed out a discrepancy in the ledger. "Why are you doing this, Elias?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "You're risking your own reputation by harboring a fugitive and helping me dismantle one of the most powerful lawyers in the city." Elias didn't look away. "Because for 12 years I've watched a brilliant woman dim her light so a mediocre man could feel bright. I'm not doing this to beat Julian, Clara. I'm doing this because I want to see what happens when you finally stop apologizing for existing." The vulnerability in his voice was a shock to her system. For over a decade she had been a resource. To Elias she was a revelation. But as their connection deepened, a new obstacle emerged. Julian had tracked her phone to Elias's vicinity. He didn't come with flowers or apologies this time. He came with a process server and a court order. Julian was suing Clara for alienation of affection and theft of intellectual property, but the real sting was the final clause. He was seeking a psychological evaluation to prove she was unfit to manage her own affairs. He wanted to place her under a conservatorship, to legally own her because he could no longer emotionally control her. The tension had reached a boiling point. Clara wasn't just fighting for her dignity anymore. She was fighting for her legal personhood. She realized that the affair baby was just the tip of the iceberg. Julian Snyder didn't want a wife. He wanted a silent, obedient ghost. And he was willing to burn the entire world down to make sure she never spoke his secrets. Clara looked at the court order, then at Elias, then at the mirror. The good wife was dead. The victim was fading. What was left was a woman who was learning that the only thing more dangerous than a man with everything to lose is a woman with nothing left to fear. The air in Elias's study was thick with the scent of old paper and the ozone of a looming thunderstorm. Clara stared at the court order in her hands, the ink blurred by the sheer force of her trembling. A conservatorship. Julian wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to erase her. He wanted to lock her in a legal room where her voice would never be heard again. "He won't succeed," Elias said, his voice a low, vibrating chord of protective fury. "He's desperate, Clara. This isn't a position of strength, it's a death rattle." "But he has the resources," Clara whispered, looking at the manila envelope that had become her Bible. "He has the connections. I'm just a hysterical wife who walked out on a baby in his eyes." Elias moved closer, his presence grounding her. "You aren't just a wife. You're the person who knows where every body is buried. And we just found the shovel." As they dug deeper into the offshore accounts throughout the night, the midpoint revelation hit them like a physical explosion. It wasn't just about the affair baby. It wasn't just about the money Julian had spent on Vanessa. As Clara cross-referenced the dates of the transfers with Julian's high-profile cases, she found a pattern that chilled her to the bone. Julian hadn't been embezzling to fund a secret life. He had been taking consultation fees from the very corporations he was supposed to be suing on behalf of his clients. He was a double agent. He would build a case for a victim, a family sickened by toxic waste, a worker injured by negligence. And then in the final hour he would lose a key piece of evidence or miss a filing deadline in exchange for a massive, untraceable payout to the account in Vanessa's name. The baby wasn't just the result of an affair. The baby's mother, Vanessa, was the daughter of the CEO of Blackwood Industries, the very company Julian was currently litigating against in a landmark environmental suit. The betrayal was total. Julian hadn't just cheated on Clara. He had cheated the law, the victims he swore to protect, and the very foundation of his noble career. The baby was a bridge between two dynasties of corruption. Julian didn't bring that child home out of a father's love. He brought him home because the child was his insurance policy, to ensure Blackwood Industries kept paying him. He needed Clara to raise the child so the world would see a happy family, instead of a criminal conspiracy. He didn't just break our marriage, Clara breathed, the horror dawning on her. He turned our home into a laundering scheme. Every luxury I've enjoyed for the last 5 years was paid for by the silence of suffering people. The shared vulnerability of that moment broke the final barrier between Clara and Elias. She broke down, not in the hysterical way Julian predicted, but with the raw, gut-wrenching grief of a woman realizing her entire adult life had been a lie. Elias didn't offer platitudes. He held her. He let her sob into the shoulder of his charcoal suit until her tears ran dry and were replaced by a cold, obsidian resolve. "I can't just leave him, Elias," Clara said, pulling back, her eyes hardening. "I have to destroy the system he built. If I walk away now, those families never get justice. Vanessa stays in his pocket. And that little boy grows up thinking Julian Snyder is a hero." Before we get to the most dangerous part of Clara's plan, I want to pause and ask you, have you ever discovered a secret so big it changed the way you looked at your entire past? It's like the floor drops out from under you. If you're feeling Clara's pain and her growing strength, please hit that like button and let us know in the comments. What would you do if you found out your partner was a completely different person than you thought? Your engagement helps us bring more of Clara's journey to the world. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the moment she strikes back. The stakes had officially reached their highest point. Clara was no longer just a woman choosing herself. She was a whistleblower with the power to take down a multi-million-dollar conspiracy. But the danger had doubled. Julian wasn't just fighting for his marriage. He was fighting to stay out of a federal penitentiary. Just as they began to map out their next move, Clara's phone chimed with a video message. It was from an unknown number. She pressed play and her heart stopped. It was Vanessa. She was standing in what looked like a sterile hotel room, her eyes red-rimmed. "Clara, if you're seeing this, it's because Julian took my son. He told me if I didn't give him up, he'd tell my father about the money I've been taking from the company accounts. He's not a father, Clara. He's a kidnapper. Please. I know you have no reason to help me, but don't let him use my baby as a shield. He's coming for you next." The twist shifted everything. Clara wasn't just fighting Julian. She was now the only hope for a mother and a child who were pawns in Julian's game. The romantic connection with Elias was now forged in the fire of a mission that could cost them everything. "We have to go back," Clara said, her voice a calm she hadn't felt in 12 years. "We have to go to the anniversary gala." "It's an ambush, Clara," Elias warned. The night of the Sterling Snyder 12th anniversary gala arrived with a suffocating humidity that mirrored the tension in Clara's chest. The venue was the grand ballroom of the plaza, a sea of crystal chandeliers and men in tuxedos who traded in the currency of influence. To the world, this was a celebration of a power couple who had weathered the storm. To Clara, it was a minefield. Elias had stayed behind to finalize the digital upload of the Blackwood evidence to a secure server, but the plan hit a devastating snag. Just as Clara stepped out of the black car, her phone vibrated. A text from Elias. "The server is compromised. Julian's firm has an injunction on all my digital assets. I can't move the files. Claire, get out of there. It's a trap." Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She was standing on the red carpet, the flashes of cameras blinding her, and she was effectively unarmed. She looked toward the entrance, but two of Julian's security guards, men she knew were private investigators, blocked her path back to the street. They didn't move. They simply stared, their hands folded in a way that signaled she was no longer a guest, but a prisoner of the event. Clara walked into the ballroom, her silk gown feeling like a shroud. At the far end of the room, standing on a raised dais under a spotlight, was Julian. He looked magnificent and monstrous. He was holding a glass of champagne in one hand, and to his left, a designer-clad nanny held the infant. The crowd was cooing, the adoption story clearly having been fed to the press an hour before the doors opened. "Ah, the woman of the hour." Julian's voice boomed over the microphone, silencing the room. He stepped down from the dais and approached her, his smile not reaching his eyes. He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear as he pulled her into a forced embrace. The files are gone, Clara. Elias is being disbarred as we speak for unethical conduct. And you're going to stand here, smile and play the doting mother. If you say a word, I have the psychiatric hold papers ready. The doctors are in the next room. Clara felt the world shrinking. The faces of her friends, the women she had shared tea with, the men who had toasted her husband, blurred into a wall of indifference. They didn't see her. They saw a narrative. She was trapped in the very life she had tried to escape, and the man holding her hand was the one who had successfully erased her identity. He led her toward the dais like a trophy. Every step felt like a mile. She looked at the baby who was sleeping fitfully, oblivious to the fact that he was the centerpiece of a criminal empire. Clara realized with a sickening thud of her heart that if she didn't act now, she would be locked away in a private sanitarium by midnight, and the truth about Blackwood Industries would die with her. Before we witness the moment Clara faces her deepest fear, being silenced forever, I need to ask you, have you ever felt like you were screaming and no one could hear you? That feeling of being completely alone in a crowded room is the darkest place a person can be. If you're sending Clara your strength right now, type, I hear you in the comments. And please, if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. We are at the breaking point and you won't want to miss how she finds her voice in the silence. The situation turned from hopeless to desperate when Julian leaned in again, his grip on her arm tightening until she was sure it would bruise. I've already contacted your parents, Clara. I told them you've had a breakdown. They're on a plane. They'll sign the conservatorship papers because they trust me. You've spent 12 years making sure everyone trusted me. You did this to yourself. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had been so good, so loyal, so perfect for 12 years that she had built Julian's pedestal herself. She had given him the very weapons he was now using to destroy her. As the orchestra began to play a slow, mocking waltz, Julian pulled her onto the dance floor. Smile, Clara, he hissed, spinning her around. It's our anniversary. She looked toward the back of the room, hoping for Elias, hoping for a miracle, but there was only the cold, hard stare of the security guards. She was separated from her ally, her evidence was frozen, and her own family was being used against her. She felt the first hot tear track down her cheek, not of grief but of absolute terrifying isolation. She was at the bottom of the well and Julian was looking down, ready to cover the opening with stone. The waltz felt like a funeral march. Julian's hand on her waist was a brand, a reminder of his ownership. But as he spun her past a mirrored pillar, Clara caught a glimpse of her own eyes. They weren't the eyes of a broken woman. They were the eyes of a hunter who had finally spotted the trap. In that moment of absolute despair, Clara remembered something Julian had said during their first year of marriage. A piece of legal advice he'd given a client that he thought she had long forgotten. In a room full of sharks, the one who controls the air supply wins. Julian thought he had cut off her air by freezing Elias's servers. He thought he had silenced her by threatening a psychiatric hold. But Julian had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the wallpaper wife. He had forgotten that for 12 years, Clara hadn't just been hosting dinners. She had been the one organizing his files, managing his schedules and, most importantly, overseeing the household's private cloud-synced security system. As the music swelled, Clara leaned into Julian, mimicking the posture of a defeated woman. "You're right, Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling with a fake fragility. "I can't fight you. Just, let me go to the powder room. I need to fix my face before the toasts. I don't want to embarrass you." Julian smirked, the triumph of a predator who thinks the prey has stopped running. 5 minutes, Clara. My men are at the door. Don't make me use the papers." He let go. Clara walked toward the back of the ballroom, her heart a drumbeat of rebellion. She entered the lavish powder room but she didn't touch her makeup. Instead she reached into the hidden lining of her clutch, a secret pocket she had sewn herself. She pulled out a small, unassuming thumb drive. It wasn't the files from Elias. It was the physical backup of their home's nanny cam and home office security recordings from the night Julian brought the baby home. Elias had been looking for financial records, but Clara had something better. Video evidence of Julian's confession. She had recorded the moment he admitted the baby was his. She had recorded him threatening her. And she had recorded the moment he boasted about Blackwood paying for the apartment. She slipped out the back service entrance of the powder room, a route she knew from planning the gala's catering logistics. She didn't run for the street, she ran for the AV booth overlooking the ballroom. Waiting there was Elena Snyder. "Did you get it?" Clara hissed. Elena held up a tablet. "I hacked the gala's presentation feed. The moment you plug that in, it doesn't just go to the monitors in this room. It goes live to the firm's anniversary tribute stream on social media. 6,000 people are watching, Clara. Including the board." Clara looked at the thumb drive. This was the moment of no return. To save herself, she had to burn down the life she had spent a decade building. She had to choose the truth over the facade. "Do it," Clara said. "Before the world sees Julian Snyder's true face, I want to celebrate this moment with you. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who finds her strength in the very place she was meant to be crushed. Have you ever had to go rogue to get justice? If you're standing with Clara as she flips the script, leave a fireworks in the comments. And hit that subscribe button. The climax is seconds away and you need to see the look on Julian's face when the screen turns on." "Clara, wait," Elena whispered, her hand on Clara's arm. "Once this plays, there's no going back to being Mrs. Snyder. You'll be the woman who took down the firm." "No," Clara replied, her hand hovering over the enter key. "I'll be the woman who finally took back Clara Fawcett." She pressed the key. Down in the ballroom, the lights dimmed for the tribute video. Julian stood center stage, preening, waiting for a montage of their 12 years of bliss. Instead, the giant LED screens flickered to life with a grainy, high-definition video of Julian Snyder in his home office, throwing a car seat onto a table and screaming, "I don't care about the mother. Blackwood is paying for the silence and you're going to be the face of that silence, Clara. You're my wife. You're a piece of equipment I own." The collective gasp from 500 people sounded like a tidal wave hitting the shore. The turning point wasn't just a realization. It was a revolution. The air supply had been cut, and for the first time in 12 years, Clara Fawcett was the only one who could breathe. The silence that followed the video was absolute. A vacuum of shock that sucked the oxygen out of the room. On the giant screens, Julian's face was frozen in a sneer of pure, unfiltered malice, his own voice still echoing through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. Down on the stage, the real Julian looked like he had been struck by lightning. His glass of champagne slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. "Turn it off," Julian shrieked, his voice cracking. "It's a deep fake. It's a fabrication by a mentally unstable woman." But the power couple mask was gone. The investors, the board members, and the press didn't see a victim of a breakdown. They saw a man caught in the middle of a confession. Clara stepped out from the AV booth onto the balcony overlooking the ballroom. She looked down at the man who had spent 12 years trying to shrink her soul. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was bathed in the harsh white glow of the spotlight. "It's not a fabrication, Julian," Clara's voice rang out, amplified by the microphone Elena had keyed into the room. "It's the truth you thought you could bury under 12 years of my silence. But I'm not your equipment anymore. And I'm not your insurance policy." Julian's security guards moved toward the stairs to reach her, but they were suddenly intercepted. Elias Thorne marched into the ballroom not alone, but flanked by 4 investigators from the state attorney general's office. "Julian Snyder," Elias announced, his voice booming with the authority of justice. "We've just received a digital dump of your offshore accounts and your communications with Blackwood Industries. You're under arrest for embezzlement, witness tampering, and racketeering." The room erupted into chaos. The friends, who had been ready to watch Clara be led away to a sanitarium, now scrambled to distance themselves from Julian. The board members of the firm were already huddled in a corner, whispering about damage control and immediate termination. Julian tried to bolt toward the side exit, but he was blocked by his own sister. Elena stood there, her arms crossed, her eyes filled with a mixture of grief and pride for the woman who had finally stood up. "You lost, Julian," Elena said quietly. "You lost the moment you thought Clara was something you could own." As the officers moved in to cuff Julian, the most surprising twist of the night occurred. A woman in a trench coat, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed, pushed through the crowd. It was Vanessa. She had seen the live stream and realized this was her only chance. "He lied to me too." Vanessa cried out, pointing at Julian as the handcuffs clicked shut. He told me Clara was the one who wanted to take my baby. He told me he was protecting us from her. He's been blackmailing me with my own family's money. The web of lies didn't just unravel, it disintegrated. Clara watched as the man she had loved for over a decade was led away in disgrace. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked like the mediocre man Elias had described, a man who could only feel tall by standing on someone else's neck. Before we witness the final moment of Clara's triumph, I want you to look at the power of speaking up. One woman's voice changed the lives of hundreds of victims of Blackwood Industries. If you believe that one person can truly make a difference, leave a power in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join our community of truth seekers. We're about to see what happens when the dust settles and a new life begins. Clara walked down the grand staircase, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. She stopped in front of the nanny who was still holding the infant. The baby was awake now, looking around with wide, innocent eyes. Clara didn't see the evidence of an affair anymore. She saw a child who deserved better than a father like Julian. She looked at Vanessa, who was shaking with fear. Clara took the baby from the nanny and walked over to the woman Julian had used to replace her. She placed the child in Vanessa's arms. "Go," Clara said softly. "Elias will make sure you and your son are protected from your father and from Julian. You're free." Vanessa sobbed, clutching her child, and was led away by one of Elias's associates. Clara stood in the center of the ballroom, the debris of her old life scattered around her. She had lost her home, her husband, and her status. But as she looked at her reflection in a nearby mirror, she saw someone she hadn't seen in 12 years. She saw herself. Justice wasn't just the handcuffs on Julian, it was the weight lifted from Clara's shoulders. The climactic resolution wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the birth of a woman who finally knew her own worth. The morning sun rose over the city with a clarity that seemed to scrub the streets clean. 6 months had passed since the night of the gala, the night the world watched the perfect Snyder marriage implode in a blaze of digital truth. For Clara, those 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal depositions, restructuring her life, and learning how to exist in a world that didn't revolve around Julian's whims. Today Clara stood in a sun-drenched studio in the arts district. The walls were no longer covered in the sterile, expensive art Julian had chosen to impress his colleagues. Instead they were lined with Clara's own canvases, vibrant, raw, and full of the color she had suppressed for 12 years. She was no longer Clara Snyder, the silent partner in a criminal's life. She was Clara Fawcett, the artist, the survivor, and the woman who had reclaimed her own name. The divorce had been finalized in record time. With the evidence of Julian's financial crimes and the video confession, his lawyers had no ground to stand on. Clara hadn't just walked away with her dignity. She had walked away with a settlement that ensured she would never have to rely on anyone else again. But the real victory wasn't the money. It was the letter she had received a week ago from the families in the Blackwood Industries class action suit. Because of her testimony and the documents she had preserved, the victims were finally receiving the medical settlements they had been denied for years. A bell chimed at the studio door and Elena walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and a wide smile. "The gallery just called," Elena said, setting the coffee down on a paint-splattered table. "The Rebirth series is completely sold out before the opening tonight. People aren't just buying the art, Clara. They're buying the story of the woman who refused to be erased." Clara smiled, a genuine, deep-seated warmth that reached her eyes. "I just want them to see the light, Elena. I spent so long in the shadows." "Well, you're glowing," Elena teased. "And speaking of light, there's someone outside who's been waiting quite patiently for his scheduled 10-minute break." Clara looked through the large storefront window. Elias Thorne was standing on the sidewalk, looking less like a shark lawyer and more like a man who had finally found peace. He wasn't there as her legal counsel anymore. He was there as the man who had stood by her when she had nothing, expecting nothing in return. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on the solid ground of mutual respect and the shared experience of the fire. There were no grand, manipulative gestures, just the quiet comfort of being understood. Before we say our final goodbye to Clara's journey, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with us through every twist and turn. Clara's story is a reminder that it is never too late to choose yourself. It is never too late to start over. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment with the word reborn. And let us know what you've learned about strength today. And if you haven't yet, join our family by subscribing. We have so many more stories of victory and love to share with you. Clara stepped outside, the cool breeze catching her hair. Elias smiled as she approached, reaching out to tuck a stray lock behind her ear. The case is fully closed, Clara, Elias said softly. Julian was sentenced this morning. 15 years. He won't be able to hurt anyone, including you, for a very long time. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs completely. The weight of the 12 years of marriage, the betrayal and the affair baby was gone. In its place was a vast, open horizon. She thought of Vanessa and the little boy, who were now living quietly and safely in a different state, far from the reach of the Snyder name. She had saved them too. What now? Elias asked, his eyes full of hope. Clara looked at her studio, at her paintings, and then back at the man who had become her closest friend and more. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since she was a child. The journey of rediscovery wasn't over. It was just beginning. Now, Clara said, taking Elias's hand and stepping forward into the sunlight. I live. For the first time in my life, I truly live. The heartbreak had been the catalyst. The betrayal had been the forge. But the choice, the beautiful, terrifying choice to choose herself, had been the victory. As they walked down the street together, the past was a fading echo, and the future was a canvas waiting for its first stroke of brilliant, unshakable color.